Hi everyone, I'm Hussein and welcome to the fourth episode of the D5 Render Crash Course. So far, we have been moving forward step by step. We learned how to set up the lighting of our scenes, create realistic environments and atmospheres, and use materials to make our models look more realistic. Now it's time to see the final result of everything we have done. In this episode, we're going to learn how to create a professional render from our projects. We'll cover the most important render settings, from the basic options all the way to the final output with the best possible quality. But we're not going to stop at just explaining the tools. After learning the main concepts, we'll take one of the models we created together in previous videos on this channel and bring it into D5 Render. We'll prepare the entire scene from scratch, adjust the lighting and composition, and finally create a render together so you can see the complete workflow in a practical way. So, without wasting any more time, let's get started with the tutorial. Before we move on to the render output settings, let's start with the Effect tab, which is located right next to the Environment tab. I have opened this scene for now, so we can test all of these settings on a real project and see exactly how each option affects the final image. In the Effect tab, you can add different visual effects and final image adjustments to your render. This section allows you to do many of the corrections directly inside D5 Render without the need to export your render to Photoshop or another image editing software. The first option is LUT. LUT, or Lookup Table, is basically a pre-made color profile that changes the colors, contrast, and overall mood of your image with just one click. It works similarly to the filters you may have seen in video editing software or even mobile apps. However, LUT are more professional and are commonly used to create cinematic looks or specific color styles. By clicking on Apply, you can choose one of the default LUT available in D5, or import your own custom LUT into the project. You can also use the intensity slider to control how strong the LUT effect is. So, if you feel the effect is too powerful, you can easily reduce the intensity and adjust it until you reach the result you want. Moving down, we have the post-processing settings. This is one of the most important sections in D5 Render. Many adjustments that we used to do after rendering in Photoshop, such as controlling lighting, contrast, colors, and image effects, are now available directly inside D5. This means we can fine-tune everything before creating the final output. Now, let's go through these options one by one. The first option is exposure compensation. This setting controls the overall brightness of the image. If your render looks too dark or too bright, you can use this slider to adjust the overall exposure without changing the actual lights in your scene. Next, we have Highlight Local Exposure. This option only affects the brightest areas of the image. If some parts are overexposed and their details are lost, lowering this value can help bring back details in those areas. The next option is Shadow Local Exposure. This works in the opposite way and affects the darker areas of the image. If your shadows are too dark, increasing this value can help reveal more details in those areas. After that, we have Contrast. Contrast controls the difference between the bright and dark areas of the image. Increasing it makes the image look sharper and more dramatic, while reducing it creates a softer and more subtle look. The next option is Highlight. Highlight controls the brightness of the bright areas in the image. If some parts of your render look too intense or overexposed, you can reduce this value to create a more balanced result. On the other hand, Shadow controls the darkness of the shadow areas. By adjusting this option, you can make shadows deeper or brighter and create a different mood for your render. The next option is Slope. Slope affects the midtones and the transition between bright and dark areas of the image. It helps you create a more natural or cinematic look. Usually small adjustments in this setting provide the best results. After that, we have White Balance. This option controls the color temperature of the image. If your render looks too blue or too cold, increasing the white balance value will make it warmer. And if the image looks too yellow or orange, reducing this value will make it cooler. Next to it, we have Tint. Tint adjusts the color balance between green and magenta tones. It is mainly used to correct unwanted color shifts in the image. Now, let's move on to the visual effects. The first one is Bloom. Bloom creates a soft and natural glow around light sources or very bright areas of the image. When used correctly, this effect can add more realism to your render. After that, we have lens flare. This effect simulates the reflection of light inside a camera lens. It creates those light streaks or spots that appear when a camera is pointed toward a strong light source, making the image feel more cinematic. The rainbow flare option is a more colourful version of this effect. It creates rainbow-like light halos around very bright areas. In most cases, it's better to use this effect with a low intensity to keep the image realistic. Next, we have vintage. This option gives your image the look of old photographs or vintage cameras. It usually reduces color saturation slightly and adds a nostalgic feeling to the render. Chromatic aberration simulates one of the natural imperfections of camera lenses. With this effect, the edges of the image slightly shift toward red, green, or blue tones. A very small amount can make the image feel more realistic, but using too much of it can make the render look lower in quality. And finally, we have saturation. Saturation controls the intensity of colors. Increasing it makes the colors more vivid and stronger, while reducing it moves the image toward gray tones and can even create a nearly black and white look. For most architectural projects, small adjustments in these settings usually create much better results than extreme changes. So, try to adjust these sliders carefully and use subtle values to keep your final render natural and professional. Continuing with this section, we now reach the Style tab. This section is mainly used for creating technical outputs, different render passes, and making further adjustments during the post-production process. The first option is AO, or Ambient Occlusion. Ambient Occlusion creates subtle shadows where surfaces meet, such as corners, edges, and small gaps, where light naturally has more difficulty reaching in the real world. This helps improve the sense of depth in your model and makes the details of the geometry more visible. By enabling or disabling this option, you can turn the ambient occlusion effect on or off. The radius slider controls how far these shadows extend from the edges. If the radius value is low, only the areas very close to the edges become darker. But as you increase it, a larger area is affected and the shadows become wider. Below that, we have the AO overlay in preview option. When you enable this option, you can see the ambient occlusion effect directly on the main image in real time and adjust the radius and intensity while previewing the result. However, keep in mind that using too much AO can make the image look unnatural and overly dark. So, it's always better to use it carefully and with moderation. Next, we have Z-depth. Z-depth creates a depth map of your scene. In this output, the distance of objects from the camera is represented using grayscale values. Usually, closer objects appear brighter and objects further away appear darker, or the opposite, depending on the settings you choose. By enabling this option, you can view the depth information of your scene. The sliders in this section define the distance range where the image becomes completely white and where it becomes completely black. By adjusting this range, you can control exactly which parts of the scene are included in the depth information. This output has many different uses. For example, in Photoshop or After Effects, you can use it to create effects such as depth of field, fog, atmospheric effects, distance blur, or even color adjustments based on the depth of the scene without needing to render the project again. The next option is Outline Mode. When you enable this mode, D5 displays the edges and main lines of the model, creating a look similar to a line drawing or sketch render. This feature is very useful for creating architectural diagrams, presenting the initial form of a project, conceptual presentations, or combining realistic renders with technical line work. It can also be used for creating educational images or showing different stages of the design process. Finally, we have Custom Background Color. When this option is enabled, you can replace the sky or the environment background with a solid color of your choice. This is especially useful when you plan to edit the image later in Photoshop, After Effects, or other compositing software, and you want to easily replace the background or add graphic elements. In addition, using a solid background color can be a great choice for creating advertising images, product catalogs, minimalist renders, brand-focused visuals, or whenever you want the main subject to stand out clearly from the background. Now that we have finished adjusting the image settings and effects, it's time to create the final output. To do this, simply click on the camera icon at the top of the screen. If you hover your mouse over it, you'll see that its name is Image. By selecting this option, you'll enter the image output settings. At the same time, this bottom toolbar will also appear. Keep in mind that even while you are inside this section, you can still adjust the lighting, materials, atmosphere, and effects of the scene and see the results live. This toolbar is only designed to give you easier access to all image output settings in one place. The first option is Mode. Here, you can choose what type of output you want to create. The first mode is Image, which creates a standard render from your current camera view. This is the option you'll use for most projects. The second mode is Panorama, which creates a 360-degree view of the environment. It's useful for virtual tours, VR presentations, and interactive project showcases, allowing viewers to explore the space from different angles. Next to it, we have the FOV, or Field of View option again. We already talked about this setting earlier in the camera settings section, but you can also adjust it here without leaving the render settings. Next to it, we have Focal Length. Focal length is another way to control the camera's viewing angle, and it works exactly like a real camera. Lower focal lengths, such as 18 or 24 millimeters, create a wider view and are suitable for showing interior spaces or large environments. In contrast, higher focal lengths, such as 50, 85, or even more, create a tighter view and are useful for close-up shots or highlighting a specific subject. After that, we reach Aspect Ratio. Aspect ratio, or image ratio, determines the relationship between the width and height of the final output. For example, if you are creating a render for YouTube, you will usually use a 16:9 ratio. For Instagram, 1:1 or 4:5 might be more suitable. And for stories, the common choice is usually 9:16. So before creating the final output, it's better to choose the aspect ratio based on where you plan to publish your project. Next to it, we have the preset size. This section defines the resolution of the output image. You can choose from preset resolutions such as 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K, or even 16K. The higher the resolution, the more details the image will contain. However, it will naturally increase the render time and file size as well. If none of the preset sizes fit your needs, you can choose the custom option and manually enter the exact width and height you want. In the options section, you can choose which render passes or channels should be saved in addition to the main image. These channels are very useful for post-production and further editing after rendering. For example, you can save the depth pass and later use it in Photoshop or After Effects to create depth of field or atmospheric effects. You can also export Material ID and Object ID passes, which make it much faster and more accurate to select different parts of the image and change their colors or materials. Channels such as AO, reflection, shadow, and other passes can also be saved separately depending on the needs of your project. They give you much more control over the final editing process. If you plan to publish the render directly, usually the main image is enough. However, if you want to continue working on the render in software like Photoshop, After Effects, or Nuke, it's better to enable the channels you need from this section. Finally, when all settings are ready and you are satisfied with the result, simply click the render button. First, D5 will ask you to choose a location to save the file. After selecting the save location, the rendering process will begin. Once the render is complete, the final image, along with any additional channels you selected, will be saved in the same location. Now, let's create a practical example together. If you remember, this is the same model that we created together earlier on this channel, and we used several different techniques to build it. Now, we want to transform this simple model into a final render, like the image you can see here, or even create an output like this. To do that, the first step is to import the 3D model from Rhino into D5 Render. Inside Rhino, I assigned different colors to each part of the model, so the materials could be separated easily. As I explained in the second episode of this course, D5 recognizes these colors as separate materials, which allows us to replace them very easily later. If you haven't watched the second episode yet, I'll leave the link in the corner of the screen because I explained this process in detail there. All right, I have imported the model into D5 using Live Sync. First, I'm going to open the navigation section and increase the camera movement speed a little. Since this project has a relatively large scale, increasing the movement speed makes navigating through the scene much faster and easier. Now, let's move on to the materials. For this wooden section, I only assigned a simple texture in Rhino to separate the materials. Now, I want to replace it with one of the ready-made materials from the material library in D5. From the wood category, I'll choose this material. I think this one works really well for this project. Now, I'll make a few adjustments to its settings. For this model, I'm going to enable the Triplanar option. Triplanar allows the material to be projected onto surfaces without depending on the model's UV mapping. In many cases, especially for models that don't have proper UVs or have many different edges and sections, it helps prevent texture stretching and distortion. Of course, you don't always need to use this option. But for this project, since these pipes will be viewed from a relatively far distance, and we don't need extreme close-up details, this method is more than enough and gives us a clean result. Now, let's move on to the surface underneath the project. For this area, I'll choose a grass material. I think this one is a good choice. However, this surface is not going to be visible exactly like this in the final scene. It's basically just a base surface that we will use later with the scatter tool to distribute vegetation, grass, and natural elements across the ground. Before that, I'll slightly adjust the texture scale, or UV scale, so the grass size looks more realistic and the repeating pattern of the material becomes less noticeable. I think this value works well, and now we can move on to the next stage of creating the scene. Now, let's create the environment and bring the scene to life. We'll start with the environment section. In this section, we have two main methods for creating the sky and environmental lighting conditions. The first method is using HDRI. As we mentioned before, D5 provides a wide range of HDRI, and each one creates a different lighting and environmental condition, from cloudy skies and sunsets to urban and natural environments. By choosing an HDRI, the lighting information, sky colors, and environmental reflections are automatically added to the scene, allowing us to quickly achieve a realistic result. However, the second method, which I'm going to use for this project, is Geosky. Instead of using a pre-made image, Geosky allows us to create and control the sky and weather conditions ourselves, giving us much more control over the final result. First, I'll adjust the sun direction. By changing the sun position, we can control the direction of shadows, the intensity of direct light, and the overall mood of the scene. After adjusting the sun, we move to the cloud section. Here, we can control the type and appearance of the clouds in the sky. The amount option controls the overall density of the clouds. This means we can create a completely clear sky or increase the value to create a more cloudy atmosphere. One of the advantages of Geosky is that almost every part of this section is customizable, allowing you to create exactly the weather conditions you need. I'll adjust this value slightly so the sky doesn't look too artificial, and we have a subtle amount of detail in the background. Now, let's move on to fog. Fog is one of the most important tools for creating depth in architectural renders. By adjusting fog, we can slightly fade distant areas and create a stronger sense of depth in the image. It also helps large-scale projects feel more natural by improving the perception of distance. For this project, I'll use these settings. At the moment, we don't need a very strong fog effect because we still want the details of the model to remain clear while adding just a little depth to the environment. Now that the lighting and weather conditions are ready, it's time to add more life to the surroundings. For this, we'll use the scatter tool. I'll open the scatter section and choose forest from the available options. D5 provides a collection of ready-made vegetation presets that allow us to quickly create natural environments. I'll choose one of these options. I think this one works well for this scene. Now I'll select the surface where I want the vegetation to be placed and click on Create. That's it. D5 will automatically start creating a forest within the selected area. As you can see, without manually placing individual trees one by one, we have created a natural and dense vegetation layer for the scene. Now, I want to add another vegetation layer closer to the ground level. I'll repeat the same process, but this time instead of forest, I'll choose lawn. In this section, we also have many different models for grass and low vegetation. I'll select one of the options. I think this one fits this scene better. I'll click on the ground surface and press Create, and that's it. As you can see, D5 created a natural and highly detailed vegetation layer for the project within just a few moments. One of the biggest strengths of this tool is its speed. Instead of spending hours modeling and placing natural elements manually, we can create a complete and believable environment within just a few minutes. Now it's time to set up the camera angles that we want to render from. The first thing I'll do is place the camera in a position that gives us the best view of the project. I think this angle works well for our first render. Now, to have more precise control over the composition, I'll open the camera settings section. Here, I can adjust camera settings such as FOV and focal length to achieve the composition I want. By changing the FOV, I can include more of the environment inside the frame or create a tighter view. I can also adjust the focal length to change the feeling of the camera lens. For example, I can use a wider lens to show more of the space, or a tighter lens to create more focus on the model itself. After making a few small adjustments, I think this angle works well. Once you reach the camera view you want, you can save it as a scene. Great, our first scene has been saved. The advantage of this feature is that we don't need to adjust the camera angle, environment settings, and lighting conditions from the beginning every time. Each scene stores all of this information and we can return to it whenever we want. Now, I want to create a few more views of the project. I'll repeat the same process, move the camera, find a suitable angle, adjust the camera settings, and create a new scene. I'll add another view and a third view as well. I think having 3 different camera angles is completely enough for this project. Now that the main compositions are ready, we can go back and improve the environmental details. One of the interesting features of D5 is that even after preparing the scene, we can still change the environmental conditions very quickly. For example, we can easily add rain or snow to the scene. All we need to do is open the precipitation section. By enabling this option, we can choose the type of precipitation and use the available sliders to control its intensity. This means that without adding anything to the model or creating complicated settings, we can create a completely different weather condition within just a few seconds. We can also change the sky of the scene. For example, instead of using geosky, we can switch the sky mode to HDRI and choose a new environment from the large collection of available HDRIs. Each HDRI affects not only the appearance of the sky, but also the lighting, overall color tone, and environmental reflections. I think this one gives a good result for this scene. Now we have reached the final stage of preparing the scene, which is adjusting the final image settings in the Effect tab. As we explained in the previous sections, this is where we can refine the final appearance of the render before creating the output. Here I can add a LUT to the image, or if I want to preserve the natural colors of the scene, I can simply choose not to use a LUT at all. I can also adjust ambient occlusion separately to have better control over the darkness of corners, surface connections, and the details of the model. One of the most useful features in this section is Z-depth. As you can see, D5 creates a detailed depth map of the scene, which we can later use for post-production tasks, such as creating depth of field, adding fog, or making different adjustments in other software. All right, at this point, the scene is almost ready. Of course, this was only one example of the workflow. In your own projects, you can experiment with these tools, try different combinations of lighting, environment, materials, and effects, and create cinematic scenes with your own style and preferences. Now, let's create the final render. To do this, I'll click on the camera icon at the top of the screen, which is called Image. This will open the output settings. For this project, a 2K resolution is more than enough. After making sure all the settings are correct, I'll click on the render button. D5 will ask me to choose a location to save the file. I'll select the desired location and the rendering process will begin. After a few moments, the final image will be ready and the file will be saved in the location we selected. And that's it. Our final render is ready. And of course, this is not the end of the story. Sometimes, after creating a render, you may feel that the image still hasn't reached the quality or the visual style you were looking for. This is where one of the interesting features of D5 comes in, AI post-processing. This tool allows you to improve your image after rendering or even completely change its overall style using artificial intelligence. You can access this section in 2 ways, either from the AI post-processing icon at the top of the screen, or after creating a render, you will see the same option available here at the bottom. I'll enter this section using this option. When this panel opens, we have a very simple and easy to understand interface. All you need to do is import a rendered image. In this project, because I clicked on AI post-processing directly after rendering, D5 automatically imported the latest render into this section. On the right side, the first option we have is AI Enhancer. This tool is used to improve the overall quality of the image. The AI analyzes your image and tries to enhance details, sharpness, material quality, lighting, and the overall realistic feeling of the render. When we click on AI Enhancer, we have several different settings available. The first one is Environment Weight. This option controls how much importance the AI gives to the environment and the overall atmosphere of the image. By increasing this value, the AI focuses more on enhancing the mood of the scene, environmental lighting, and the surrounding space. The next option is Texture Strength. This controls how much emphasis is placed on the details and textures of the image. By increasing this value, details such as wood textures, stone surfaces, vegetation, and materials can become clearer and more pronounced. However, the default settings provided by D5 usually create very good results, and in most cases, you don't need to make major adjustments. I'll keep these settings as they are and click on AI Enhancer. Now, the AI starts processing the image and improving the render. After the process is complete, you can compare the before and after results. If you are happy with the result, you can easily save the final image. This feature is especially useful when you want to improve the quality of your output in a short amount of time. However, the second option on the right is even more interesting: AI Style Transfer. This tool doesn't just improve the image quality, it can completely change the mood and atmosphere of the entire scene. In other words, you have one render, but you can ask the AI to recreate the same image with a completely different style and environmental condition. For example, you can create a winter scene, a night scene, an autumn atmosphere, a spring environment, or many other different styles. Let's try it. From the available styles, I'll choose the winter option. Now, I'll click on AI Style Transfer. D5 starts processing the image and recreates the current render with a winter style. After a few moments, the new image is ready. Now, we can compare the before and after results. As you can see, without changing the 3D model, materials, or the original scene settings, we have created a completely different environment. The render has been transformed into a winter scene with snow, different lighting, and a new atmosphere. This feature can be extremely useful for creating different concepts, testing ideas, and presenting multiple versions of the same project. But what's even more interesting is that we can use this new result again in Style Transfer. For example, I want to transform this winter version into a nighttime scene. I'll open AI Style Transfer again, choose the night option this time, and wait for the image to be generated. And the result, a completely different version of the same project with a nighttime atmosphere, new lighting, and a different feeling. This is one of those features that can significantly speed up the design and visualization process in architecture because it allows you to quickly explore different scenarios for a project without having to rebuild the scene and create new renders every time. All right, that's enough for this episode. In this part, we learned how to use the Effect section to improve the final appearance of our renders and control different image settings before creating the final output. After that, we imported a 3D model that we had previously created together on this channel into D5 Render. We adjusted the materials, created the environment and vegetation, set up the lighting and camera, and finally created a complete render of the project. We also explored the AI post-processing features and saw how artificial intelligence can help improve the quality of our renders or even completely change the style and atmosphere of a scene. In the next episode, we'll move on to one of the most exciting parts of D5 Render: animation. We'll learn how to create professional animated presentations and bring our projects to life. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like it. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming videos. As always, feel free to leave your questions and suggestions in the comments. I read every single comment and I'll do my best to reply. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.